The whisper of the impossible. In the history of human biology, there are limits. There are hard lines drawn by nature that dictate what the female body can endure. We are designed for one child, occasionally two, rarely three. But there is a threshold where a blessing transforms into a medical catastrophe. For Halima Cissé, a quiet 25-year-old woman from Timbuktu, Mali, that threshold wasn't just crossed, it was shattered. The story doesn't begin in the sterile lights of a hospital, but in the dust and heat of Mali. It begins with a sensation of heaviness that made no sense. Halima was a mother already. She knew what pregnancy felt like. But this was different. It felt less like a pregnancy and more like an invasion. Her stomach expanded at a rate that terrified the village elders. It was heavy, hard, and seemingly alive with a chaos of movement that never slept. When she first visited the local doctors in Timbuktu, the mood in the room wasn't joyous, it was confused. The doctor applied the gel to her abdomen and pressed the ultrasound wand against her skin. Usually, an ultrasound shows a clear, rhythmic pulse, a single ghost in the machine. But on Halima's screen, there was no clarity. There was only a storm, limbs overlapping limbs, skulls shadowing skulls, heartbeats creating a cacophony of white noise that sounded like a galloping herd. The doctors counted, then they frowned, wiped the screen, and counted again. 7, they told her. We see 7. In that moment, the room fell silent. To carry septuplets, 7 babies, is almost always fatal in a developing nation. The human uterus is a muscle, and like any muscle, it has a breaking point. Halima wasn't just carrying a family, she was carrying a biological impossibility. A mother in exile news travels fast. The scans reached the highest levels of the Malian government. They understood immediately that Timbuktu did not have the resources to save her. If she went into labor there, she would bleed out in minutes. The decision was made swiftly. Halima had to be evacuated. This is the part of the story often overlooked, the psychological tearing apart of the family. Due to COVID-19 travel restrictions and costs, her husband, Kada Arbi, could not go with her. He had to stay behind in Mali while his wife was loaded onto a plane, a vessel as fragile as glass, to be flown across the Sahara to Morocco. Imagine that flight. Halima, strapped into a seat, surrounded by strangers, feeling the vibration of the engines mix with the constant rolling kicks from within. She was leaving her home, her husband, and her first child, flying toward a country where she knew no one. She was entirely alone with the 7 strangers living inside her. She arrived at the Ain Borja clinic in Casablanca. It was a place of white walls, sharp smells, and silence. This would become her prison. The doctors there, led by Professor Youssef Alaoui, looked at her scans and felt a cold chill of anxiety. They confirmed the Malian diagnosis: 7 babies. The strategy was simple but brutal: delay. Every day the babies stayed inside was a victory. Every day meant their lungs were developing. But for Halima, every day was a marathon of pain. The psychology of waiting for weeks, Halima existed in a state of suspended animation. She was placed on strict bed rest. Rest is the wrong word. It implies relaxation. This was endurance. Her belly had grown so large that it crushed her internal organs. Her bladder was flattened. Her stomach was compressed to the size of a walnut, yet she had to eat. She had to consume enough calories to feed 7 growing fetuses, even as her body screamed that there was no room for food. But the worst part was the breathing. Her uterus had pushed her diaphragm up so high that her lungs couldn't fully expand. She lived in a constant state of air hunger, taking shallow, sipping breaths, unable to ever fill her chest. Sleep was impossible. If she lay flat, she suffocated. If she turned, the weight threatened to tear her muscles. She lay there for 5 weeks, 35 days of staring at the ceiling. Psychologically, this is where the mind begins to fracture. Halima wasn't just afraid for herself, she was doing the Sophie's choice in her head. She knew the statistics. In pregnancies this crowded, usually the strongest babies consume the resources, starving the weaker ones. She lay there wondering, who is alive today? Is the one on the left still moving? The one on the right has been quiet for hours. Is he gone? She spoke to Kader on the phone, his voice a crackly lifeline from thousands of miles away. He told her to be brave. She told him she was tired. The doctors watched her like hawks, waiting for the first sign of labor, the first contraction that would signal the beginning of the end. The army of 35. It happened at 30 weeks. Her body had reached the absolute limit of human elasticity. The doctors decided they could not wait another hour. The delivery was scheduled. If you could look down into that operating theater, it looked less like a medical procedure and more like a rocket launch. The logistics were staggering. The hospital had assembled a team of 35 people, 10 doctors, 25 paramedics and nurses, and lined up against the wall, like soldiers in a trench, were the incubators, 7 of them, heated, lit, and waiting. Halima was wheeled in. The anesthesia took hold, offering her the first moment of physical relief she had felt in months. The room went quiet. The lead surgeon raised the scalpel. The incision was made. The uterus was opened. The extraction began. It was a race against the clock. The uterus, overstretched and thin as paper, could collapse or hemorrhage at any second. Baby 1, a girl, handed to a team. Baby 2, a boy, handed to a team. Baby 3. The rhythm was hypnotic. The doctors were sweating. The room smelled of antiseptic and adrenaline. 4, 5, 6, 7. The team let out a collective breath. The 7 incubators were full. The record was tied. The impossible had been achieved. The doctors began the procedure to close the uterus, the tension in their shoulders dropping. But then, the surgeon froze. His hand was still inside the abdominal cavity, checking for the placenta, when he felt it. A hardness. A shape. He looked up at the anesthesiologist, his eyes wide above his mask. "A tens," he whispered. "Wait." He reached deeper, behind where the crowded mass of siblings had been. He pulled out a tiny, wet, wriggling form. 8, he announced, his voice cracking with disbelief. "There is an 8th." Pandemonium. A nurse scrambled, shouting for another incubator. They hadn't prepared for 8. They were 1 bed short. The room was spinning with the shock of it. But the surgeon wasn't done. He felt one more shadow. A tiny stowaway, tucked deep into the back, hidden behind the bladder, invisible to every scan, silent for 30 weeks. 9, he said. The room went dead silent. 9. Halima Cissé hadn't been carrying 7 children. She had been carrying a nonuplet, a gang of 9. The fight for life. Halima woke up hours later. She was groggy, sore, and terrifyingly light. The weight was gone. A nurse approached her bed. "Halima," she said gently, "it is not 7. Halima blinked. "It is 9. 5 girls, 4 boys. Combined, they weighed barely more than a single large newborn. The smallest was roughly 500 grams, the weight of a loaf of bread. Their skin was translucent. You could see the road map of their veins and the beating of their walnut-sized hearts. This began the 3rd act of the nightmare. The delivery was over, but the war for survival had just begun. Halima was wheeled into the NICU, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. It looked like a sci-fi laboratory, a forest of glass boxes, wires everywhere, beeping monitors creating a symphony of anxiety. This is the psychological cruelty of extreme multiple births. The mother cannot hold her children. Halima stood before the glass, looking at 9 distinct human beings. Khadija, Fatuma, Hama, Adama, Umu, Ba, Mohammed, Umar, El Hadji. She had to memorize their faces through the plastic. She had to fall in love with them without touching them. For months they lived in that clinic. The logistics were staggering. As they grew, they consumed 6 liters of milk every single day. They went through 100 diapers every 24 hours. Halima and the nurses were trapped in an endless cycle of feeding, changing, and praying. There were terrifying nights, fevers that spiked, oxygen levels that dropped, times when Halima sat in the dark, wondering if she would take home 9 babies or 8 or 5. The miracle of return. But nature, having pushed them to the brink, decided to show mercy. They grew. First, they breathed on their own. Then, they gained weight. Their skin thickened. Their cries got louder, a chorus of 9 voices demanding to be heard. In late 2021, the impossible happened again. They were discharged. Halima, Kada, who had finally joined them, and their army of children boarded a plane back to Mali. They didn't return as a medical tragedy. They returned as national heroes. Fast forward to today. In May 2025, a chaotic, loud and beautiful party took place. There were 9 cakes, 9 sets of candles. The Nonuplets turned 4 years old. They are no longer fragile shadows on an ultrasound screen. They are toddlers running in 9 different directions, tearing up the house, laughing, fighting and living. Medical history books will record the statistics. They will write down the birth weights and the surgical details. But the real story isn't the number 9. The real story is the woman who lay in a white room for 5 weeks, suffocating under the weight of the impossible, refusing to let go. The real story is that sometimes, just sometimes, we underestimate how much life the human body can hold.